We're going to be talking about a subject called Why Farmers Must Fight Climate and Extreme Environmentalism. And Owen is the director of Methane Science Accord. He's an affiliate of Groundswell, and you can find a lot of information on the internet about Groundswell. And he's a retired politician, but he had to come out of retirement to deal with a lot of these issues related to the amount of stress that's coming on farmers as a result of all the regulatory environment related to methane, ruminant methane. And he's also New Zealand president of Federated Farmers. And welcome, Owen. I want to give you a chance. You had wanted to share initially some context in terms of what we're dealing with here in all of this extreme regulatory environment and how it's affecting farmers and ranchers in New Zealand and around the world.
Dan, it's great to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity. And yes, my background is really farming. I had a farm in the South Island of New Zealand and farmed there for many years. So I've got and I've traveled extensively in the United States and got a great respect for your country and for the farmers of the United States, and know that both your farmers and our farmers are really struggling at the moment against a rising tide of opposition, which is ill-founded, badly designed, and totally unfair, often quite vitriolic and poisonous even criticisms of agriculture and farming is totally unhelpful and totally unnecessary. We feed the world, and it's often forgotten the contribution that farmers make, working hard, working long hours, taking a lot of risks, and just out there making sure that the world is fed. I think one of the things that's part of this tide of opposition that farmers are facing comes from a lot of misunderstanding, even untruths about methane, the gas that comes from cows and sheep, all of the ruminants in the world, from their belching, their breath, as they seek to digest tough fibers in grasses and feeds. The gut in the ruminant produces a gas, methane gas, which is then belched out through the front of the cow, out through the nose of the cow, and enters into the atmosphere. What most people forget is to make sure that cows get fed properly, we feed them vegetation that is grown with carbon dioxide. So we're actually using a greenhouse gas to produce another one. And that we're going to talk about a little bit about that as we go. But let's put some context on this, Dan, because that's important. How much is the atmosphere is actually methane? If we were to pretend just for a moment, imagine for a moment that the whole of the atmosphere was a flight from Los Angeles to New York. What's that, about 6 hours or more of flying, a long trip. So if we imagine that trip as the whole of the atmosphere, that 12-mile belt around the globe, then the ruminant methane produced by American farmers from their beef, their dairy cows, their sheep, their goats, their bison, all of that methane would only represent 3 inches of that trip from Los Angeles to New York. So that gives you some idea. It's about 1.9 parts per million. So all methane is about 1.9 parts per million. It's very small. It's very tiny. But unfortunately, we have a lot of scientists who've completely lost their sense of perspective about that and pretending that somehow methane is a major problem.
So we're talking about the ruminants that are produced for, say, meat industry in the United States represent about 3 inches of their methane contribution represents about 3 inches. And so there's a lot of other methane sources out there that are contributing. And so talk about those a little bit with us.
Sure. Methane comes from many sources. You can imagine that a lot of that is totally natural. Methane comes out from under the sea, it comes out from wetlands and swamps. If you've ever been to northern Russia, you'll know there's just thousands and thousands of acres of wetland and swamp that is producing methane, and the tundra further north even does the same thing. There's a lot of methane that is totally natural entering the atmosphere all the time. Ruminants, all the ruminants of the world, the domestic animals, the cows in India, Brazil, and countries like that, all of the ruminants, giraffes, elephants in Africa, the total methane is 14% of the actual methane in the atmosphere. So it's a relatively minor amount anyway, relative to natural sources.
Yeah,
Rice paddies, for example, produce methane.
sure. And you got termites that are producing a lot of the methane.
Yes,
And so there's that dynamic of, okay, if we're doing more agriculture and there's less termite mounds, then you've impacted the amount of methane in the atmosphere. So there's a lot of things that people don't think about in this that are things that move the methane equation backwards and forward. And it's a very dynamic, complex situation. And the contribution as a greenhouse gas is also more minor than what a lot of our alarmists, climatologists are actually relaying to us, particularly through the news media or through other types of political agendas. So
so
let's go ahead.
it's a major issue. One of the things that um, farmers need to consider is that there's a well-known kind of belief that scientists, 97% of scientists believe in catastrophic global warming. That's actually a nonsense.
Yes.
It's a misuse of statistics, and it's very dangerous. A lot of the science that's actually conducted in climate science starts with the fact that methane's a problem and that CO2 is a problem. They do no basic science to demonstrate the actual cause and effect situation. It's well worth taking that into consideration.
Yes. So my understanding, because I've done a lot with more with the CO2 area, and correct me if you're encounter something different, but actually there's a big question at this point as to whether global warming is if it's happening, we're actually coming out of an ice age, and so obviously we're needing some global warming, and whether global warming, if it continues to increase from both human and natural causes together, it's not necessarily a bad thing for the world because greenhouse gases are what we need for being able to survive on this planet. And so if we have warmer temperatures in the northern and southern latitudes, and we have those warmer temperatures more so at night and more stable temperatures from night to day in the northern and southern latitudes. And if we have more warmer winters, those are and we can farm further into the northern and southern latitudes, particularly in the north where there's more land mass. This is a good thing for the planet and a good thing for agriculture, in particular because CO2 has a fertilizing effect.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And there are more people retiring in Florida where it's warm than retiring in the north where it's cooler, particularly in the winter.
mhm,
You're absolutely right. If you look back in history, the temperature's gone up and down.
mhm,
We're coming out of a very cool period. Historically, been a very cool period. And the other thing that's worth noting, and scientists hate you pointing this out, is that historically,
mhm,
rising temperatures have preceded
mhm.
the rise in CO2.
They
So
lead.
they're completely the other way around that is often postulated in the media, particularly. Yes, the connection between CO2 and temperature is not actually categorically, firmly, beyond all elements of doubt, proven. Not at all.
Right, we have a lot of other factors that increase influence. The sun is huge, and its impact, particularly in a way that it affects the nucleated particles that come in from supernova explosions in outer space. Those particles, when there's a bigger solar wind, it blow them out, and so there's not as much cloud formation. When there's not as much cloud formation, the sun reaches the earth and warms it more. And then you have this 500-year ocean balancing act that the ocean has a memory, and it is God gave us this wonderful climatic balance system named the ocean that moderates the temperatures for 500 years. And so when the sun gets too active or not enough active, the ocean is kicking out heat or absorbing heat, and then that's taking in the CO2. That's one of the problems when the ocean takes in too much CO2 when it gets cooler, then we don't have as much CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's a real
Well, you're right. There are many people with greenhouses, glass houses, pump CO2 into them to speed up the growth. For goodness sake, CO2 is a wonderful thing. Without it, we'd all be long dead. It's the food of plants, and they love it. I'm a great fan of Dr. William Happer, one of the most erudite and mature and best acquainted scientists on this issue in the world. And Dr. Happer is very clear that humans trying to alter the climate is like pushing water uphill with a rake.
Yeah. I stayed at his home. I gave a presentation at the Princeton University on the subject that we're talking about, more from the CO2, not the methane side, and why it's beneficial to global agriculture. And I'm going to be giving that presentation here at the same agricultural farm show that this is going to be presented at our presentation. And yes, he's excellent. We even got into discussing the mycorrhizae and how the plant benefits from additional mycorrhizae when there's a higher level of CO2, because the plant is healthier and it can put out more exudates to the mycorrhizae and to the bacteria, and those can be more active in the soil and bring it more nutrients. So it's just a huge expanding synergistic benefit to have more CO2 in the atmosphere. People don't the amount of additional we're not even finding these things in the lab tests in terms of the mycorrhiza, because we can't replicate that. Things going out a mile, these hyphae mats, and bringing back things in the plants is be able to feed those mats and bring in nutrients and water and every other thing the plant needs.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There's one other thing about methane I think that's really important to understand.
Mhm.
And I've got a graph that shows the electromagnetic spectrum and where methane and CO2, along with water vapor, fits on that spectrum. I don't know whether you can bring that up, Dan, while we're talking. The reason I want to raise it is this. Methane in the atmosphere is considered by most scientists to be able to interact with the outgoing radiation. And that's really what is causing this so-called problem with greenhouse gases. As the sun shines and the radiation comes in from space, it tends to bounce off the Earth's surface and re-radiate back out into space. And as that radiation goes up, it intermingles with the various molecules in the atmosphere, whether it's carbon dioxide, whether it's H2O, water, or methane. The issue that's overlooked so often is that a lot of the methane in the atmosphere is in a part of the electromagnetic spectrum where there's no interface with radiation at all. So two areas of methane in the atmosphere don't do anything at all in terms of warming the planet, and the other one is heavily outweighed by water vapor. There's a competition, if you like, between water vapor, CO2, and methane to interact with that radiation. And methane's role in that is extraordinarily minor. And that needs to be taken into consideration, because people look at all methane and say that's a problem of that magnitude. It's not. It's only a small fraction of the methane that plays any role in the atmosphere.
Yes, whatever affects water vapor in the atmosphere is the big driver for the greenhouse effect because that is the biggest contributor to the inner flow. If a volcano goes off
Absolutely.
and a subterranean or sub-ocean volcano goes off and puts a huge amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, we're going to see a major effect from that because that's a major contributor. Yeah,
Mm.
you're
It
right.
is.
So
And
let's
you compare that with a herd of cows, and it's impossible to compare it because one is just so massive and one is just so minor.
uh,
What is interesting is that we're spending a lot of money in New Zealand, and I know the United States is spending also huge sums at places like UCLA trying to reduce the amount of methane that each animal produces by putting boluses in the gut, by vaccination, by altering the composition of the food. So there's a huge amount of expenditure going on, not only in our country, but around the world, trying to reduce methane. Basically, what happens with a cow is, or a beef animal, or a goat, or a giraffe, for example, is they eat that cellulose, those fibers, they go into the gut, and the ruminant of these animals is the only place that can really break down that fiber. And as the fiber is broken down and the sugars are extracted, there's a gas given off which comes back out through the mouth and the nose of the cow and re-enters the atmosphere. Our fear in New Zealand is that interfering with that process, whether it's with boluses or vaccinations, is going to do two things. One, it's going to cost farmers a lot more. You're going to have to round your cows up, bring your beef animals in more regularly, dose them, push boluses down their gullet, and that's time and cost. The second thing is, what are our consumers? What are the people that drink our milk and eat our beef going to say about using artificial means to depress methane? Already in Europe, there's been a backlash amongst consumers saying, hey, we don't want to actually drink the milk that's been come from animals that have been treated this way. So we've got a lot of issues that we face at the moment, and I think we need to go back to basics instead of trying to deal with the aftermath of the problem. Let's go back to the heart of the problem. Is methane a problem? Is ruminant methane a problem? The answers are flat and categorical no. And what we need is the farmers of the world and our politicians to wake up and fight this cause more strongly than they are at the moment. We need to be aware of what's happening. We're facing rapid costs. We're facing being excluded in trade agreements. There's a lot going on behind the scenes from extremists, even from 14-year-old schoolgirls who know absolutely nothing about the sciences, that are parading around the streets, waving placards, saying agriculture is bad, cows are bad, meat is bad. For goodness sake, we need to fight back. We've got good products. We've got products that are essential to human beings. They're high quality. They're produced under the best conditions possible. And we have everything to be proud of and nothing to be ashamed of.
When you think about this too, did we talk about the fact that methane only has a lifespan of 10 years? It's not like carbon dioxide. So go into that a little bit. That's really, I think, an important fact for people to know.
Methane is CH4. So it's one atom of carbon and four of hydrogen. And we all know that hydrogen's a very light gas. So methane is also a light gas and it rises up through the atmosphere very quickly. And because it does and it doesn't interact with radiation to the same extent, it passes out through the atmosphere very quickly or into CO2 and water vapor very quickly. So within minutes of a cow breathing out methane, oxidation starts. And what scientists like to tell you is that methane has a half-life of 10 to 12 years. Most of it's gone. Almost all of it is gone within 9 to 10 years. And to talk about something that's such a short life gas, as warming the atmosphere and warming the oceans and causing problems. It's just a nonsense. It doesn't bear scrutiny. And CO2 is often called a long life gas. I think there's arguments about it, just how long it does last in the atmosphere, but certainly methane is into the atmosphere and out of the atmosphere. And remember that the oxidization into CO2 just completes the old circle that we learned at school, back at college, where CO2 was taken in by photosynthesis into plants are eaten, the methane is breathed out, the methane oxidizes into CO2, and so the circle is completed. Farmers have got nothing to worry about because they're the only group, and this is really important, they're the only group in the whole greenhouse gas story that use a greenhouse gas to produce another one. A car doesn't,
Mhm.
an industrial plant doesn't, an airplane doesn't, but our cows do. We actually are using a greenhouse gas to produce another one. So we shouldn't be worried. We should be fighting back against false science. There's one more thing that's really important.
Sure.
If you look at what's happening in your prairies, around the whole of the states, around your concentrated farming areas, the use of cattle on pasture and out in the prairie areas actually sequestering, it's called, carbon dioxide into the soil. As the plants grow and that die back and that matter falls into the ground, there's CO2 coming out of the atmosphere and entering the soil where it's permanently sequestered. And scientists don't like talking about this because it interrupts their little story about how bad methane is. But the reality is that we're sucking CO2 into the plants. We've also got microbes in the soil, bacteria, fungi, paramecium in the soil who are using CO2 out of the atmosphere to build carbon into the soil. And in New Zealand, we're looking at ways in which we can increase that activity, that microbial activity, to improve the amount of CO2 that's taken into the soil and kept there permanently on into the future. And we think there are ways to do that using natural macro and micro nutrients and micro minerals. Certainly the science is looking very good on that. We will have more tools to bring CO2 out of the atmosphere, sequestered permanently in the soil. And most farms have vegetation, they have trees, shrubs, etc. They're all helping to suck CO2 out of the air. And again, we need to tell our story. We need to be out there fighting the misinformation, the disinformation, and what in actual fact are just straight out lies and untruths peddled by people who've got some sort of an agenda to stop our products, meat and milk, being used by consumers around the world.
There's a certain group that just hates any kind of impact that mankind or humankind might have on the environment. And so they see nature as a delicate nurture, and that anything that we do that might influence or change anything as a threat to a natural balance. And it's really hard to deal with that kind of ideology. They don't have human flourishing as their prime objective. They just have anti-change, and humans as blighters, polluters in everything that they do. So what can you do with that kind of an ideology? It's just it undermines every productive potential of that God has given us.
You're right. I don't know what for certain what's happening in US schools, although I can imagine. Our school teachers in New Zealand aren't teaching or educating anymore. They're indoctrinating. They're
Mhm.
using ideology to cram it into the minds of our kids. So we've got a generation of young people in their 20s who have been through schools and colleges, universities, and have had false stories, false information fed into their mind. And they come out thinking they have to save the world. They have to do something, to stop this misuse of the Earth's resources. It's actually a nonsense. It doesn't stand or bear any scrutiny scientifically, morally, or any other way. Mankind has been using animals since time began, and should continue to use both animals and vegetation to stay alive and enjoy the fruits of the earth. It's something that I think we need as a farming community to do more about. We need to be educating our young people. We need to be intervening into the education process by one means or another, whether it's simple things like inviting your city cousins out to the farm, whether it's having open days on farms, whether it's stories in newspapers and magazines and TV and social media. We need to be more active, more proactive in dispelling these stories because they're flat wrong. It's not like we're trying to tell a story that doesn't have a strong foundation. We have truth and goodness on our side. The morals of our story are much stronger and firmer than those who are peddling this disinformation. So look, my message to United States farmers is work harder, guys, on the big picture. Get out there, tell the story. Make sure that your cousins in town, in the cities, better understand the issues. There's no problem with our meat, with our milk. In fact, it's good for you, it's healthy, and it's important that you continue to use those products with no worries whatsoever. But we've got to fight back. We've got to tell the story, or else we're going to be sidelined. We're going to be pushed into the corner more and more by what is misinformation, untruth, and really vitriolic stories that are doing huge harm, not just to us, but to the health and well-being of our young people wherever they are.
Get to the point where in Europe, there's in Holland, they wanted to buy out 3,000 farms because they felt like there was too much ammonia emissions or nitrous oxides, different things of that nature. And that when you try to get farmers to reduce to ridiculously low levels and cut their herds or down, that's taking away all the economic profitability of that farming operation. And I know in Ireland, they're trying it in Belgium. Half the European countries are affected by, at least half of them have major pushbacks by farmers who saying it's gone too far. And even the political climate in Europe is reflecting now that people want to see a change, and it's gone in a really crazy direction. And so,
Absolutely. And even here in New Zealand, and we're very dependent upon agriculture. It's a much bigger part of our GDP than it even is in the United States. We've got senior people, both in the scientific realm and in the political realm, saying we need to cut back on the number of cows. We need to cut our national herd back by 30% or 50%. Some even saying we need to do away with all livestock and just return to, I don't know, eating bugs and cabbages.
and lab culture.
It's all very strange and it's easy to laugh at, but it's actually serious. It's gotten away from the point of being just a minor kind of fringe group to being much more center stage. And it's time we took up the challenge of stopping that nonsense, of fighting back against misinformation, disinformation, poor quality science, and some of just the ridiculous claims that are being made that just don't bear substance.
If the education system in the United States continues in the same direction as is what's been happening in Europe and New Zealand and Australia and some of and even Canada, where the farming community is more increasingly affected by these overreaches of the environmentalist agenda. We've got to get out ahead of this and cut it off and curb it so that it doesn't get to where Europe and New Zealand are at right now, in Australia too.
We've got to realize that the image of farming is changing rapidly. Even I can remember the pictures of American farmers with their overalls, they're standing by their tractor, standing by their cattle, and being seen as being not just an essential part of the community, but bastions of goodness and people of moral standing who were vital to our community and vital to our future. All of that picture is gone. You don't see that picture anymore in the classrooms and the university.
No.
And what is vitriol? People who say farmers are wrecking the environment. We have to do something about that. We didn't want it once upon a time. The story sold itself. Now we have to fight for it. Now we have to pick up the challenge of tuning that around. It's not too late. We can still do it. But we have to realize that it starts in the classroom. It starts even at the kindergarten, the preschool level, where children are indoctrinated with stories about the environment that are hopelessly wrong, hopelessly inadequate, and very anti the truth. If I can do anything else other than just reminding farmers to put aside some time and resource to fight back against this misinformation, then I'll have done you something of value. It's important that we recognize that we have to do it. Nobody else is going to do it for us.
Right, right. And like in New Zealand, there are all these taxes on livestock methane, and basically every politician that wants to follow the climate agenda, they're putting out so many new taxes and so many new regulations and things that it's going to force farmers out of business. And then what happens? You have China continuing to be the largest methane emitter, and you have other countries that have less sustainable or less safe methods of producing food. They become the exporters and you become a net importer. I think Britain is a great example of how a lot of these policies have forced them into being more of an importer. And Germany is losing its industrial prowess because the cost of electricity and energy is going up. But this leads to environmental hazards elsewhere. You take China with the rare earth metals production, huge wastelands of acid stench affecting the populations. And nobody in these media do not go there and film those kinds of places and say, look, this is where there's the most environmental hazard.
Yes, it's true, unfortunately. Farmers have got a great story to tell. The rural community is the bastion, the cornerstone of our community worldwide. Cities are just the opposite of everything that's good and wholesome about rural America, rural places around the world. I'm just sitting here thinking about, for example, what the Fellowship of Christian Farmers does when there's a flood or a fire or a catastrophe somewhere in the country. Farmers help farmers. They're out there helping their fellow men. There's a great camaraderie, a great respect of each other in the rural community that doesn't exist in the city. We have city people that don't even know who's in the house next door, let alone do anything for them. We've got a great story to tell. It's a moral tale of great value, and we're not telling it as clearly and as often as we should do. And what worries me is that there are fringe elements around the anti-food, anti-farming area that are of great concern. People who think that the world is overpopulated and we need to strangle our babies at birth. We need to stop populating the, the planet. We need to reduce populations. And they're prepared to use really unbelievably dangerous and horrifying methods to do. They're at the fringe a lot of this, and they don't necessarily tell their story directly like that, but they use young people, frightening them about the environment and frightening them about farming to actually achieve their ends.
Mhm.
We need to know our enemy. You have to know who you're up against and what you're up against before you start the fight back. But fight back we need to, and we need to do it quickly and effectively.
Right, right. So there's almost, I'm thinking of Chuck Swindoll and the Seasons of Life, and I'm very appreciative of you, Owen, that you've chosen this season of life to you've retired from some of the political things, but you've come back to say, Hey, we've got to rise up and be a blessing, show the blessing that the farming is to the world. And farming community is not a curse. It's producing products that people want and producing them safely. And we're being challenged in profitability to even produce those safe products by the overreach of regulatory environments that don't even make any sense at all, and aren't based on science, but based on ideologies of non-impact. And so this is the thing that we really need to push back. We need to challenge, get it into our children's school books or even homeschool our kids and look and see what they're teaching, and then challenge the teachers and challenge the
Absolutely.
educational committees, the educational boards, and challenge them and get out there and make some points and get your talking points together. And we need people organizing, and we need young people that can also challenge. We need a few young people rising up to challenge Greta Thunberg and say there's actually a different story here, and there's a more truthful story here.
One of the most telling and effective things that your new president has done has been to fight the centralization of education. Over the last decade or two, the, the policies and propaganda, the policies and the kind of whole education story has been captured in Washington rather than out in the states and out in the regions. So I think that's one of the most effective things that he's done to date, and I applaud that. We're trying to do that in New Zealand right now, decentralized education, because when it's centralized, it's captured by the ideologues. It's captured by people with an agenda that is different to the well-being and the healthy future of our children. So there's something that's useful that the farming community can applaud, can help, can encourage. And there are many ways to do that, but it's really important that we recognize that we've lost a generation of young people on these issues. They just don't understand. They've been indoctrinated. It's going to be hard to turn them around, but you have to start somewhere.
Right. I appreciate that. That's really wise advice. And I also, Trump has wanted to, I don't know if he's done it yet, but he's wanted to move the Bureau of Land Management out to the west side of the country. That's a really smart move too, because it should be managed closer to where most of that property exists. And we're having a real problem here in the United States from overreach, trying to shut down any access to public land. Actually, we really shouldn't have a whole lot of public land to begin with because we don't really need it. That's almost communism to have a lot of commonly held public land. But that land should be productive, just like private land, and should have grazing rights and mineral rights and being so we can have something productive come from that land. But the environmentalists are developing new strategies to shut that land down and say, oh, the endangered species or the riparian zones or the wildlands project and the various other programs, 30 by 30 types of agendas that are trying to take 30% of that land and say it's got to be locked up and not used. It's got to be completely conservation. And it's really too bad that ideology is coming right out of our education system that's promoting that. So you're right on with that.
Dan, one of the things I was able to do was travel through Eastern Europe before the wall came down, before Eastern Europe was freed. And I saw the worst environmental management I have ever seen anywhere in the world. Socialism, centralized control, government departments dictating the terms on how land is used is totally wrong and bad for the environment.
Yes.
The people who care for the environment most are the people who use it. Why would you destroy your own house? Why would you destroy your own well-being? Farmers are by far the most effective environmentalists wherever you go in the world. Of course, there are individual exceptions, but generally, the people who use the environment know it well, treat it better, and putting land into the hands of an amorphous group of people who take no responsibility for it, but want to dictate the terms on it. It's just false. It's wrong. It doesn't work, and it never has. It's important that farmers take full responsibility, as they do, for it and care for it. And as things occur and we find out new elements and new findings about how we handle our land and how we can improve our performance, we adapt, we adopt them, we adapt. And that's the great thing about privatization or private ownership of land.
Right. Otherwise, you have when power is consolidated at the top, you have dictatorial types of things. You don't have checks and balances. You don't have accountability to the people, and you cannot move the mutually beneficial exchanges of goods and services that is to come from the productivity, the value addition from everything that God has created, making maximal value addition and blessing to the world. That just doesn't happen in those kind of top down systems where land and even it's called the tragedy of the commons when land is owned communally. I see it when I'm doing development work overseas. The communal owned land is not be very productive. And you can go to Scottsdale, Arizona, and you can see that the tribal land takes up a corner of the city. That corner only has a stadium in it, and the city of Scottsdale wraps around that tribal land. It's a great example.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
go ahead.
one of the things I think that people are mistaken about, and you listen to the Bernie Sanders and the AOC and people espousing socialist views, they try and pretend that that form of government, that form of control, is enjoyed and controlled by all of the people. This sort of view of socialism that somehow it dissipates power in amongst the people, that is so wrong and so evil. Socialism is about control by the elites, the people at the top telling you what to do, what time to get out of bed in the morning, what to eat for breakfast. That's the direction that socialism takes you. What it does is pushes a few people with power to the top who dominate, control, and keep you all in the dark. I'm anxious about what's happening around the world, even happening in the United States, where socialism is seem to be gained some credibility, some sort of. It's extremely bad. It's bad for people. It's bad for the environment. The worst, as I said, the very worst environmental care I saw, and I could tell you stories about rivers and streams and land in East Germany and places like that, Poland, that were destroyed by the socialists because they thought they knew better. The powers in Warsaw and in Berlin tried to control everything and tell people what to do, regulate, bring in new laws. It failed. It was an abysmal failure. And the failure was that it hurt people, it hurt families, and it hurt the environment. And what the United States needs to do above all else is hang on to the politics of private ownership, of individual rights, of equality for all, and make sure that you hold those things dearly because it's that by far the best thing for us as individuals. It's by far the best things for our farming communities, and it's by far the best for the environment.
Right, because essentially what socialism does is it eliminates the signaling system of a market economy where people produce what is in demand, and so it turns it around and forces people to into situations where they don't want to do a particular thing, but they're forced to do it. And so to have that kind of forcing happening where you're transferring people that are productive to people that are not productive, or sectors of the economy that are not productive, and disengaging parts of the economy with forced socialism, then basically to get that kind of control, to get people to do what they don't want to do, you actually have the people give up power and centralize it at the top. And that's one of the big problems. Then you basically have a dictatorial system. And all social systems, when you're forcing people to do what they don't want to do, you're going to have a dictatorship at the top. That's and
Absolutely.
of accountability.
The last 20 years or so have been an era of increased regulation. I'm
Mhm.
sure it's happening in every state in the United States. It's
Mhm.
happening here in New Zealand.
Mhm.
We have more and more laws and more regulations. Those regulations are expensive. they're intrusive, they bring penalties which are unfair and inequitable. They create a bureaucracy behind them of people who design them and who maintain them and who police them. What we need to understand again is that education beats regulation any day. That taking people with you and having them understand what the issues are is far more effective when people own the issues rather than having them forced on it. And the era of regulation, as I said, of the last 20 years or so, needs to be turned around. You need to turn it around the United States. You need to turn it around in New Zealand. It's counterproductive and it creates a hotbed for centralized control, which is anti-humanity, anti-family, anti-community, anti-environment.
And there's a sector of the elites, international bankers and stuff that move their portfolios quickly whenever there's going to be a change. And so they're siphoning off the economy. That's not a natural flow of the economy but there's a lot of profit to be made whenever there's a big change in terms of moving portfolios. So that's another factor. The elitists really like big changes and because they can move their portfolios around.
Well, we've seen it in so many different ways. And this issue with the methane, ruminant methane, and trying to force farmers to make changes is just one illustration of what's happening on a wider scale, not just in the United States and New Zealand, but around the world. I'm talking to farmers in many different countries, and I visit many different countries, and I see the same things happening. And it really is time, Dan, for us to take up the challenge of turning this movement around and bringing truth and reality and a much stronger moral position back into our communities, into our politics, and into our education. It's vital. I think farmers, more than any other community, hold the key to turning the situation around. We're the people of the land. We understand the land. We understand the resource. We understand food production, the most essential of basic activities. We're the people that have got the opportunity and the resources to make those changes. We have, unfortunately, it's going to take time and effort and resource, but we either do it or we hand our grandchildren an impossible situation where they will not only be able to flourish, they'll literally be pushed out and left to wither and die.
I think you're right on that. We really have to dial in. I'm thinking about our name, Fellowship of Christian Farmers, and how we derive a lot of these principles from the Bible, particularly the book of Genesis, Genesis 1:28, where we are called to a stewardship, a standard of excellence to where we're producing and being productive. And if you go to Genesis 2:5, it says there was no man in the garden to work the ground. And 2:15, they put Adam in there to keep and to or to dress and to basically cultivate, make it productive. And so this idea of it's the opposite of these principles that we are to hands off and not do anything and to reduce our numbers. When God said to be fruitful, multiply, bring human resources and the potential of those human resources to everywhere in the world. That's what we're called to do. And these are all
It's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? I often think of this. When Jesus spoke about giving out talents, he didn't give the talents to the government. Did you notice?
No.
He gave them to individuals.
Yes.
And thereby lies a great story. Our resources are best handled by individuals, by families, by communities. The more diffuse and the more decentralized our resources are, the more effectively they are used, the better the quality in all respects of the use of those resources. And I think if farmers could think of that, as I said, Jesus didn't give those talents to the government. He didn't want them centralized. He wanted them in the hands of individuals. And the Old Testament is really just a range of stories about how people used their land, the animals on the land, and the vegetation and growth from the land to flourish. And that's the order of things that was instituted at the beginning and need to carry on today.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else, Owen, that you would like that you're thinking, oh, I should have said something about this, or that's really important, or just giving you a last chance because we've really gleaned a lot from you today about in so many different ways, and we're really appreciating you. Any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things is when we look at the way we use our resources on the farm, it's important that, having said a lot about science and about the bad aspects and negative aspects of science, we need to look at the positive aspects. We need to be open to new developments and new ideas that are going to improve what we do, not just with our farms, but with the land for the long term. And I think we need to be smart about that. We need to be open to working with those members of the scientific community who are focused on the right things and not the wrong things. So there's an important message there, I feel. But overall, I guess my little 1 cent's worth is that farmers, unfortunately, I think in many ways, because we don't have time and resources to spend easily, particularly with the tight constraints that there are on many farmers. But we need to face the reality. If we don't get out and fight for our future, that try and turn around this tide of misinformation, this amount of untruth that's being peddled in schools and universities and in the media, if we don't fight back, I'm afraid we're going to lose something incredibly important and hand a will to our children and grandchildren that is going to be a very unhappy place for the future.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that quote from Ronald Reagan about how if we don't promote, basically paraphrase, if we don't promote freedom, the next generation is going to be sitting around, and the older generation is going to be talking about the days when we had freedom. I wish I had that exact quote, but you can look it up. This about the sunset days of I can't remember it, but anyway, that's a good way to close this today and talk about what we're going to do. What kind of a environment or what kind of a stewardship or a world are we going to pass on to the next generation? That's all at jeopardy right now. Okay,
Absolutely. And look, all the best to you, Dan,
thank
and to
you.
the Fellowship of Christian Farmers and the messages that you share with the community. And yeah, let's take up the challenge. It's in front of us. It's winnable. It's doable. We just need the will to do it.
And thank you for putting a plug in for us about the disaster relief and all the efforts that we do in that respect and mission trips that we take, short-term mission trips, and all the things that we do to help farmers remove the stressors in their lives. And I think this environmental agenda is a huge stressor for farmers. And so we definitely want to work together to push back against that. Thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us today, and God bless you and in New Zealand and the rest of the world as we push back against extreme environmentalism. Thank you.